Microsoft continues to release information about Microsoft 365 Copilot in our anticipation of its launch at some point in the not too distant future. This has included new articles on Microsoft Learn, a new adoption website, new content on the Microsoft Tech community, and various events and seminars touching this topic. One of those events was an AMA, or Ask Me Anything, and I thought it would be good to pull together some of the information from that and other sources into a video covering common questions that I've seen people ask on this topic. So let's dig into some questions. Well, Microsoft 365 Copilot will be available as an add-on license to Microsoft 365 Business Standard, Business Premium, E3, and E5. No other Microsoft 365 tiers have been mentioned, including A licenses or the academic tiers, F licenses for frontline, or anything that's Office 365 rather than Microsoft 365. This list of 4 prerequisite licenses has been confirmed several times by Microsoft, so I think that we can be pretty sure that at the time of launch, that will be the definitive list. And if you don't have one of those licenses, you won't be getting Copilot at that point. Some of Microsoft's AI tools are licensed on a pay-as-you-go or capacity basis, such as Azure Cognitive Services or Power Platform AI Builder. It was also leaked a few weeks ago that those organisations on the Microsoft 365 Copilot Early Access program were paying a fixed fee for a bundle of licenses rather than buying individual Copilot licenses. However, at the recent AMA, it was confirmed that this will be a per-user licensing, which I think most of us would take as being able to buy an individual license at a time. I don't think we'll entirely know until further details are released, but I think this is the best indicator yet that Copilot licenses won't be in some expensive bundle that's inaccessible to smaller businesses, and this is consistent with it being available on smaller business license tiers. Well, this is the million-dollar question. Hopefully not $1 million. Last month, industry news outlet The Information reported that those organisations in the Early Access program were being charged $100,000 to license 1,000 users for a year. So that works out to just over $8 per month per user. And this is equivalent to the currently discounted price of Teams Premium, which is probably the most directly comparable add-on license available in Microsoft 365. However, ChatGPT Plus is priced at $20 a month, and GitHub Copilot is priced at between $10 and $20 per month. And you have to believe that because of Microsoft's involvement in both places, they were very much involved in those pricing decisions. So there may be capacity to charge a lot more than $8 per month for Microsoft 365 Copilot's functionality. We'll have to see. This is a question we just don't know the answer to yet. But for Microsoft, it's probably a balancing act. How many Microsoft 365 E1 or Business Basic or even Office 365 license holders can they push over to more expensive Microsoft 365 license tiers? And what's the upside of doing that and charging a little less for Copilot over just charging more for Copilot and making it a harder choice for those organisations to commit to any upgrades? Also, we don't know how much running Copilot costs. We have to imagine that one of the big reasons no indication of pricing has been announced yet is that Microsoft really wants to see how heavily organisations in that early access program use it and how much more it costs them than just providing their existing Microsoft 365 services. My guess is it's going to be priced at around $10 a month, but I have no data or inside knowledge to back that up. What's your guess? Drop me your thoughts down in the comments. If you find content like this useful, please hit the like button down below and consider subscribing to the channel and activating the bell icon so you know the next time I release a video. If you think this information would be useful to people in your network, please consider sharing it there too. So, at launch, Microsoft 365 Copilot will be accessible in Teams, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook and Loop. And this list was confirmed at the recent AMA. However, what's confusing is that Microsoft 365 Copilot isn't all of Microsoft's Copilots. So for example, Copilot in Power Apps is a different product outside the scope of Microsoft 365 Copilot. So its lack of inclusion in that list doesn't mean it's going anywhere. Same too for other announced functionality like SharePoint Copilot. What I think is more interesting is that we've seen, for example, Copilot in OneNote, but that wasn't on the list. So we can maybe assume that that won't be released at the same time as Copilot in the other apps, which are all definitely part of Microsoft 365. Also, I don't think we should be holding our breath waiting for Copilot in Microsoft Access or Publisher or even the Project desktop app, as these are areas where Microsoft hasn't seen much development focus in recent years. For the list already shared of Teams, Word, PowerPoint, Excel and Outlook, there will be a Microsoft 365 Copilot experience available both on the web and in the desktop apps at launch. I've excluded Loop as it's purely a web-based app and I'm not aware of any desktop app coming for that. And as for Outlook, you will need the new Outlook client for Windows rather than the legacy client. Interestingly, I've not seen anything to indicate that you need the new Teams client to enable Copilot features, but do drop a note down in the comments if this is something I've missed. But I'm guessing the reason for this is because the legacy Teams client is functionally different than the legacy Outlook client, as Teams has always been predominantly a web-based app wrapped in a Windows client shell, whereas Outlook is built on much older app technology. There is going to be a Bing experience linked to Copilot, which I assume will be similar to the Bing capability to bring you search results across Bing and Microsoft Search that we already see. And to make that work, you will need Edge in the same way that you need Edge to make Bing Chat work today. In this video a couple of weeks ago, I showed you how Edge is at the core of making Windows Copilot work. So I'm surprised that Edge isn't a prerequisite for any of the other Microsoft 365 Copilot functionality outside of Bing. But at this time it isn't, and that was confirmed at the recent AMA. Currently, as part of the Early Access program, not every feature is available on every platform. But it was confirmed that it's planned that Microsoft 365 Copilot experiences will be available across Windows, Mac, Android and iOS by the time of general availability. It's either licensed and activated or it's not. You can't selectively allow someone to use Microsoft 365 Copilot in Word but deactivate it in Outlook, or let them use it on the web and not in desktop clients. I'm really unsure what the use case would be for wanting to do this, but I saw this question come up in a couple of different ways, so it seems to be something people are thinking about. If you have a use case associated with this idea, please do let me know why you would want to do this down in the comments so I can better understand why this is a concern for some users. You need to be in the current channel or the monthly enterprise channel for Microsoft 365 apps to be able to use Copilot. At this time, it's not been confirmed whether businesses who use the semi-annual channel will get Copilot but just later, but I think this is a reasonable expectation as that would generally be the rollout timeline that we'd expect with other app updates. It's also unclear whether having the correct desktop apps is a prerequisite to see Copilot enabled in the web interface, but this seems really unlikely due to the fact that there are different deployment routes that businesses can take, with only some of them being coupled to the individual user and others being coupled instead to the device. I think the biggest set of questions people seem to have around Microsoft 365 Copilot continues to be around how data will be accessed. Yet I think this is also the area where Microsoft has actually provided the most robust information. However, I think that because what we're seeing here in terms of functionality is so far outside of what we're used to, and to some extent kind of blows our mind a little, the same questions keep coming up as it really raises concerns and doubts and the potential for things we have to change in ways that we hadn't even thought about too much a few months back. But with that said, let's see if we can grapple with some of the questions people have. The AI tools are not trained on your data. Your data is your data. Microsoft does not use it to train AI models, well, unless you specifically use data that's your data to train a model in Azure Cognitive Services, for example, or for anything else. The data in your tenant is never used for training, your prompts are never used for training, and the resulting responses are never used for training. Now, I think this can be really confusing, as if you don't understand why this is, it can be kind of counterintuitive. How on earth can an AI tool provide useful information related to your business if it isn't trained using that information? Well, this comes down to something else that Microsoft has announced and shared a lot of information on, and that's the Copilot system. And the fact that the AI tool or foundation model or GPT-4 or whatever you want to call it is just one part of making Copilot work. The contextual understanding that's important to Copilot doesn't come from the training of the AI. It comes from the data that you as a user have access to through the Microsoft Graph or through some other extensibility layer from a third-party data source. This is referred to in an AI context as grounding. The Copilot orchestrator kind of sits in the middle of a conversation that goes on to get the AI model the data it needs to provide the most useful response to whatever your prompt is. This could be a multi-step conversation where the AI model receives some data and then upon looking at it realizes it needs more to give you a good answer. The AI model only has that data in the context of that conversation. It doesn't store the data or write it outside of your tenant. It's exactly the same concept as if you take some text you've written and feed it into ChatGPT and ask it to improve it. ChatGPT doesn't automatically have access to every piece of text you've ever written, but it may from time to time ask you for some more information in order to complete its task. It doesn't need to be trained on your personal data to do its job, as you have to give it the right context or right grounding each time you make a request. So yes, but because Microsoft 365 Copilot just operates entirely within the security context of the Microsoft 365 user and has access to whatever data inside your tenant that user has access to. If you could find a file or an email or a chat or something else through using Microsoft Search, then Copilot can find it too. The tooling to restrict access for Copilot is exactly the same as the tooling you would use to ensure any user or group doesn't have too much access to resources. You can remove a user's access to certain SharePoint sites or review what is shared with different users out of OneDrive, and there are various other tools that are available to you to do this in services like Purview. I dug into this issue in far greater detail a couple of weeks ago when I put out this video that's linked below, but the TLDR really is that access to data for Copilot isn't a Copilot issue. If information is overshared, then it's already overshared in Microsoft 365, and whether you plan to deploy Copilot or not, you should really fix this for a whole host of information governance issues. So at this time, there are two methods that have been established that allow Copilot to access data. The first is data indexed by Microsoft Graph. And this includes everything in your tenant, like your files, your emails, your chats, but it can also include data in third-party systems using a capability called graph connectors. Now, what graph connectors essentially allow you to do is extend the index of the Microsoft Graph outside the borders of Microsoft 365 into third-party data sources, or even things like other data sources in Azure. There's a marketplace for graph connectors, just as there are for similar capabilities elsewhere in the Microsoft Cloud, that your admins can use to deploy in your environment to connect together your different data repositories, whether they live within Microsoft 365 or outside. So licensing for graph connectors is on a quota basis of index size that's connected to the number of Enterprise E5 license users in your environment or specific quota add-ons that you buy. And for this reason, it's really a technology that's aimed at large enterprises that have big pools of those expensively licensed users. To get to the maximum index capacity of 50 million items, your organization would need 100,000 E5 licenses, or you'd need to be spending $50,000 a month on add-on index quota. The other way to access third-party data is through plugins built for Microsoft 365 Copilot or existing Teams message extensions. These were announced as another way to extend Copilot's access to data at build, and this solution will probably be what fills the gap for smaller businesses where access to additional graph indexing through graph connectors is out of reach. In terms of access, it's important that any external data source has sufficient capability to restrict data access, as is the case inside Microsoft 365. Copilot will be able to pass along that user context, but what is returned will entirely depend on the third-party system honouring that context. So first, it's important to understand that everything involving Copilot, excluding access into third-party data sources that you've set up or enabled, stays within Microsoft's borders. While Copilot does use GPT-4, Microsoft uses the capabilities of its Azure OpenAI service to deal with Copilot requests. It does not send requests or data outside of Microsoft's borders to OpenAI or to any other service. In terms of where your data lives, as Copilot does not independently write or retain data, your data only leaves the confines of your tenant ephemerally where being processed by the AI model, and is never accessible to anyone else. Microsoft plans to service those AI model requests in or as close to your region as possible, and will honour data residency compliance requirements like the EU data boundary. Organisations with highly specific compliance requirements around this issue will likely want to dig into the detail a little more once the tool is generally released. Even if you pay $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus, you're still rate limited on requests to the GPT-4 model. So it seems logical to wonder just how much consumption you're going to be able to get of Copilot before it asks you to take a break. However, as it stands, there's no information to suggest this will be the case. However, Microsoft's response at the recent AMA was that the capabilities are still under development and that some features could be limited or reduced at times, depending on usage. To me, this seems a somewhat dangerous policy, as if every business decides to license a handful of users and based on a roundly positive experience decides then to invest in licenses for everyone, only to find this growth creates usage caps that limits the efficacy of the product, that's going to really dent Microsoft's reputation in this field. It would make far more sense to me to start with a usage cap based upon the average usage during the early access period and then raise it over time so that expectations can be managed. What we also don't know is if any caps that were placed would be global across the entire service or limited on a tenant-to-tenant basis. So if you're in a tenant where more people are using Copilot more, would you see more rate limits over time? So users of services like the OpenAI API will know well that there are strict limits on the amount of data that can be included in a transaction with the large language model based on a maximum number of tokens. You'll also be aware that the bigger the token limit you want, the greater the cost of the transaction. So it makes sense that Microsoft might want to make the data flying back and forth to the AI model as small as possible. However, when asked this, the Microsoft response again focused on the capabilities still being under development and that there could be limits applied based on usage, but there's nothing hard and fast right now. We'll have to see how Microsoft approaches this issue and how it develops. I doubt that we'll be thinking about file size in terms of the bits and bytes of the actual number of the file size, and we'll actually be thinking more about the determining factor of how much text needs to be read, and really it'll be Microsoft Search and the graph index that will be largely responsible for breaking that down into manageable chunks. But different businesses will probably rely differently on information that might be spread through very large complex documents. And so ensuring that the AI model is basing its response on the right data at the right scale and size will be very important. Microsoft does not assert any ownership of the material Copilot creates on your behalf. But outside of that, the issue of copyright and how you might be able to use AI-generated material will come down to where you're located and any local laws or regulations that apply. Certainly, the material it creates is only present in the context of that request, so it isn't shared with anyone else who could assert ownership. But how you use it is going to be down to you and what your policies or the local laws are. Yes, this question was answered at the recent AMA. The example given was that Copilot would be able to access the information on the Microsoft 365 roadmap and present results including information like that. It's unclear how it will flag information it has sourced from online versus inside your tenant, and it also isn't clear whether this will be a capability that will need to surface via business chat or via the Bing interface, or whether you would, for example, be able to ask Word to create a document based on an external website. There are already articles on Microsoft's support site about Copilot, and in fact an entire user help site about AI, so this is appearing already, and slowly there is content arriving on Microsoft Learn that offers Copilot related insights. Microsoft is planning a learning path for Copilot administration, and there will be a Copilot related Centre of Excellence template for Teams, which is going to help with deployment, and the last I heard this was slated for release in August. I think it's unlikely there will be a specific role-based certification added for Microsoft 365 Copilot, as it doesn't seem there's too much to do in Microsoft 365 that's specific to Copilot. It kind of leverages on other things, but certainly there are lots of questions that continue to need to be answered. So there we go. That was a lot of questions and a lot of answers, and hopefully some useful information to you. I will keep updating on this topic as it evolves. I hope this was of value to you. Please remember to hit the like button if it was, and do check out my other videos on Microsoft 365 Copilot. Until the next video, bye bye.